Did any of you, when you went on a trip, there's still a few that are museums. Anybody ever see a workhouse? It's just like a big barn structure. Women were upstairs at night, men were downstairs. And they built walls to nowhere. They wanted to keep the men gainfully employed. Walls to nowhere. And for that, they gave them, once a day, they gave them a little gruel. Well, here's the guy, he's out there in the field, and he's standing like this, and he's leaning on the shovel because he's diseased and he's starving. And what do you think the superintendent said? I told you these people are lazy. I told you they're good for nothing. I told you they're uncivilized. They're monkeys and apes. Hey, it's not me saying it. The records are in the British Parliament. They're in Cork University of what they said about our people. Monkeys and apes. Because we're dying. And what did they do? The estate owners, they came along and they tumbled the hovels. Sometimes with the people in the hovel. And then they set the hovel on fire. With the people in the hovel, they set it on fire. And with that, I will read. Would anybody like to do a read? I always get at least 3 or 4 people. If there's a short time, I'll read it for you. You know I'm a storyteller. So this is called An Old Woman of the Roads. Now, this poem was written by Pádraig Colum, C-O-L-U-M, and he, R.I.P., and he came from the parish of Columkill. You see the relationship between the name of the parish and his name? And he wrote beautiful poetry and books. Another one that he has written, you can get him on Amazon, they even have him here. The Cradle Song. Anybody heard of the Cradle? All about children and babies. And he uses imagination. But here's one. So sometimes a person, they were delirious and they left the hovel and they're walking around in the fields. And here's what she said. Oh, to have a little house. Are you guys reading along with me? To own the hearth and stool and all, the heaped up sods upon the fire, the pile of turf against the wall. You read each line, each sentence, and you just think about it, what these people must have been going through. To have a clock with weights and chains, and the pendulum swinging up and down, a dresser filled with shining delf, speckled in white and blue and brown. Well, I could be busy all day cleaning and sweeping the hearth and floor, and fixing on their shelf again my white and blue and speckled store. I could be quiet there at night, beside the fire and by myself, sure of a bed and a loaf to leave, the ticking clock and the shining delf. Ouch! Well, I'm weary of the mist and the dark, the roads where there had never been a house nor a bush. We're talking about in the west of Ireland. And tired I am of bog and road, and the crying wind and the lonesome hush. And I am praying to God on high, and I am praying him night and day for a little house, a house of my own, out of the winds and the rain's way. What do you think about that? I usually at least get a tremendous big applause on that each night. Google him up. He passed away in 1968 while he was on tour here in America, in Connecticut. And so, what did they do with her body? What did they do with our bodies? They just gathered them up and threw them in a ditch. Without the benefit of what? A priest and a Catholic service. But just as an aside, when some of our people were sent down to Australia, penal farms, of which there were at least 10,000 young girls, but when the Irish got to Australia, what do you think and there were no priests, that was the other thing with those orders. The priests were forbidden, and there was a price on their head, and they were killed if they couldn't escape or if they were identified. So what do you think the Irish did when they got to Australia and Sunday rolled around? They went to Mass. They had a Mass for 15 years until a priest, a traveling priest on horseback, was able to come around. Now, what is the one thing that you could not do in a Mass if you were not a priest?
Consecration. The consecration of the bread and the body.
Yeah, you can't do that. Now, I happen to disagree. I don't see any reason why we can't, but that's the rules. And as you heard before, we got to follow the rules. We have rules. And so for years, that's what they did. They had marriages, they did everything that a community would do in Australia. And by the way, you find thousands of our people who were, especially young girls, who were who were sold as slaves to plantation owners in the Caribbean. And so if you go down to St. Lucia, if you go down to some of the islands, you'll hear all O'Shaughnessy, O'Neill, all of the Irish names. And we haven't been good to them. See, I can get in trouble with the Irish too. Because we should have done more, we should do more to identify with those people. Here they are trying to keep their culture alive. It's all black, black intermarried. And they're trying to keep but I don't see anybody. Hey Rob, if they invite me down there to do a talk, I'll go down.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just send me the tickets for me. So, as our people were starving and dying, grain from the great estates was being shipped out from the port of Drogheda. Where is the city of Drogheda located in Ireland? Oh, you're the man. So I'll be coming back to you in another minute or two to talk about Drogheda and the Turkish Sultan. I'll bet you know about that. Under armed guard, grain stuff was taken out of Ireland for shipment to England. So never ever accept that it was a potato famine. It was the blight according to Lord Trevelyan, in the English Parliament, he said, you know, it's the Irish, it's their fault that they're like this. Their population is too big. And it is God's will that this has happened. It'll reduce the population. And another economist said, well, if we could get down to maybe 5 million, we could manage the thing. This was the conversation, people. Like we're talking about, as they called us, apes. Well, you wouldn't treat your animals like this. And furthermore, the British taxpayers are not going to pay to support the inefficient, ineffective, uneducated Irish 10 miles away. Hey, it's just not me. Here's an article from the New York Times, one of the world's premier newspapers. We won't agree, whether we agree with them or not, whatever, right? It's one of the world premier. And here's what they said. According to an article in the New York Times of February 24, 1995, there was no Irish potato famine. In 1845, starvation of Ireland was planned in London by the government. Let them die. Let that population, it's too high. By the way, I don't accept the statistic of 8 million people. I have to reluctantly because I can't find anything else. But if you think for 1 minute, the people living in the hills, in the hovels, were accurately counted, it might have been 4 million. Maybe it was 10 million, I don't know. And the Times, they did not die from lack of potatoes. They died from lack of food, close quote. In other words, genocide. And I'm not one to throw the word genocide around so easy. Here's a letter from a British Army officer dated April 24, 1846. He says, the barges leave Clonmel. Where is Clonmel located in Ireland? What county? Everybody remembers R.I.P. the late Frank Patterson. Where did he come from? You guys didn't know Frank Patterson, the Irish tenor? That's why I took up singing. I thought I'm going to have a Clonmel, County Tipperary. And I quote, the barges leave once a week for this place with the export supplies under convoy, which last Tuesday consisted of 2 guns, 50 cavalry, 80 infantry, escorting them on the banks of the Suir as far as Carrick. While its people starved, the Clonmel district exported annually, along with other products, 60,000 pigs in the form of cured pork. You see, the great historian and friend and mentor of mine, Mike McCormick, Anybody heard of Mike? Okay. So he retired, he was the national historian for the Hibernians, and he was just a terrific mentor and teacher. And he used to say, we have, because some people say, we really need to know all of this. What's the point? And he said, if we don't know our history, we cannot defend ourselves as Irish people. So you don't have to have a PhD, but you know, a little bit. Does everybody know Frederick Douglass? Who Frederick Douglass was in American history?
Yeah.
So what was he? Who was Frederick Douglass in American history?
He opposed slavery.
Now listen, you had 10 questions, 10 answers.
Oh, he was a free slave. And he worked with Lincoln.
He was a great friend of Lincoln's. And Mr. Lincoln was terrifically influenced by him. So here's what he said. He was on tour and he ended up in Ireland. When former American slave Frederick Douglass visited Ireland in 1845 to rally support for the campaign to abolish slavery in America, he had no idea that this thing was breaking out in Ireland. Quote, never did human faces tell a sadder tale. These people lacked only a black skin and woolly hair to complete their likeness to the plantation Negro. The open, uneducated mouth, the long gaunt arm, the badly formed foot, and the ankle. Shuffling gait all reminded me of the plantation and my own cruelly abused people. And I disagree with him on one thing. So you American historians, what would I disagree with him?
The slaves were better fed than the Arabs.
Absolutely. Let the woman talk for herself. God's sake. I never heard of American slaves treated like our people were treated. Never. And so, we have a family, 4 people. And they're dying, they just can't. Well, what they had was they were young. And while the great Pete St. John, anybody know musicians or writers here? So Pete St. John is a writer and a musician, storyteller, etc. And while he was doing research in County Galway, he came across some little pieces of paper. By a lonely prison wall, I heard a young girl calling, Michael, they are taking you away, for you stole Trevelyan's corn, so the young might see the morn. Now a prison ship lay waiting in the bay. Chorus. Lo, lie the fields of Athenry, where once we watched the small free birds fly. Our love was on the wing, we had dreams and songs to sing. It's a lonely round the fields of Athenry. verse 2. By a lonely prison wall, I heard a young man calling. Nothing matters, Mary, when you're free. Against the famine and the crown, I rebelled, it cut me down. You must raise our child with dignity. Lo, I the fields of Athenry, where once we watched the small free birds fly. Our love was on the wing, we had dreams and songs to sing. It's so lonely round the fields of Athenry. And then another couple, it was just the two of them. They boarded a coffin ship. What were coffin ships? So coffin ships were lumber transport ships that went to British North America, Canada, upstate New York, whatever, and they brought back lumber to England. Remember, what was starting up at the time? So the ships now are going back to North America, and somebody said, hey, let's put these people on the ships. And a ship that could reasonably hold 150 people would leave Cove with 200 people, packed into the hull, and the filth and the stench of the hull. For a 3 to 4 month voyage to North America. 30% would not make the voyage, they would die en route. 30%. The bodies were just thrown overboard. Except for one man. I'm not going to go into the story because it's very detailed. His name was Pat O'Shea from Donegal, and when Pat passed, women on the ship prepared him for burial. Now, how do I know this? Somebody kept notes. And when they got to Manhattan, they were turned in and they ended up, Cork University is great for all this stuff. And so they have those stories there from real people. But anyway, we had this young couple who were leaving Queensland. What is Queensland now called? Cove, as in Cove, County Cork. And they board a ship, a coffin ship. 30% would die on the voyage, and 25% more would die within 3 months of arriving in New York. I'm using New York, it could be Boston, Philadelphia, and lots of other places. 25% would die. So the young couple board the ship, and they're thousands of miles away from home. They knew they were never going to see their parents again, their relatives. They knew that. They knew they couldn't talk to them. Right? Yes. And we have tons of letters, thank goodness. And they stood on the shore of that foreign land, and they looked out towards Ireland. And these are their words. Far across yonder blue lies a true fairyland, where the sea ripples over the shingle and sand. The gay honeysuckle is luring the bee, where the green glens of Antrim are calling to me. And if ever I should return to that old place harsh and dull. I'd knock on that wee cabin door and talk to the friends. Remember the picture of vivid is, where the green glens of Antrim are calling to me. So that's their story. Let me see. When did they arrive in Manhattan? They were met by what we call runners. I was a runner once. If you were working in a factory 50 years ago, 60 years ago, there were no amplifiers. There were no cell phones to say, could you go and get Joe from the third floor in town to bring up blah, blah, blah? So when the ships arrived in Manhattan, they were met by Gaelic-speaking runners. Remember, these people could not speak anything other than Gaelic. And the runners promised them jobs and apartments, and set them up in apartments. Remember, no Irish need apply? Of course, they couldn't find work. They couldn't find jobs, they couldn't speak language. They were farmers at best. Laborers. Lots of them went to work on, what is it, the Erie Canal? You know, doing manual labor. Anyway, they got sick in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And they were thrown out on the sidewalks of New York, where the Department of Public Works came around, picked up the bodies, and threw them in the incinerators. Never to be heard from again. Never to be heard. Where's my brother? Where's my sister? Then I do a whole talk on the New York Irish. I start there and then I build up to Tammany Hall, Boar Street, and you know, all of that. How are we doing for time? Are you guys sick and tired of me already?
No, we get time.
All right, let's take questions. Anybody with a question? And remember, I'll learn something, I guarantee you, from questions. Every time I'll learn something.
When did they open up Ellis Island for so many immigrants going through?
So who was the first person through Ellis Island?
Probably an Italian, I would think.
No!
Irish?
Who was the young girl that came through with her two brothers?
Body something.
Huh?
Body something. Not coming to me, I know you know.
She was the first person to arrive and walk through before she went out onto the street, and she was given a gold coin by the superintendent as the first person.
There's a statue of her down in
Huh?
Cove. There's a statue of her in Cove there, that aged that much.
Yeah. It'll come back in a minute. I'm glad that you mentioned statutes. Who are the people that contributed to the famine efforts?
The Indian, no, was it Choctaw? Choctaw from Oklahoma, was it? Cherokee? No, it's Choctaw.
I have a question for you. They were forced off their reservations onto what we call the Trail of Tears, in the dead of the winter to another reservation. the nation of Choctaw Indians. And if you go to Cork today, you see a tremendous, great big monument of a headdress, yeah, with the feathers going up. Now, here's the question. How were the Choctaw tribes, how were they able to send $170 to the famine relief effort? If you think about it, the answer is in front of you. How were they able to do that? 170. Okay, so the Catholic Church had missionaries all over the world. And I don't know, I can't prove this, it just makes logically sense that there was a missionary serving the Choctaw, and he knew about the famine, and he collected the $170 and sent it back. Who else gave money?
The Queen gave some money, now, I don't think she gave enough, but.
She gave 1,000 guineas.
Yeah.
And she would have given more, except she had pressure from Parliament. What was the name of the Turkish prince who sent 5 ships laden with food to the port of Drogheda? And then he followed up with 5 more ships, or 6 more, and those ships were scuttled on the ocean seas by our dear cousins. So if you look at the coat of arms for the city of Drogheda, has an Islamic, it has an Islamic emblem built into the coat of arms in recognition. I still don't get the connection. I think it might have something to do with England and Turkey and superpowers and all of that. Who else? Now, we have a group of people that are not recognized for their contribution. They're called the Quakers. At the time, there were 3,000 Quakers in Ireland. Now, Quakers were business people. And they did yeoman work, not only in Ireland, but they sent people overseas to help the effort. They sent people to Parliament, to Congress. Who was the vice president that was there? They raised awareness in Washington, D.C. The vice president. You got it? You have to write it down and then Google it out. But yeah, who else gave money?
Well, I imagine Pope gave money, I know we did.
Handel performed the Messiah in Dublin. For the first time, it was performed in Dublin, so that the proceeds could go to the family.
I have a letter from a priest in County Meath to the Archbishop in Dublin. And the gist of the letter is, we should be concerned with increasing the holdings of the church. That's where our concern should be. In other words, it's an opportunity time. If Cromwell is set up all these, why can't we get some of that? Let's see, who else? Judaism, the Jews in New York City, the Irish, Boston, all of the typical groups sent money. Was there another question? Okay, so let's finish up with this. This is the great Irving Berlin song. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voice in psalm and prayer. Come on now. God bless America.
Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.
On the mountains, through the prairies,
To the oceans,
widely foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
You did very good yourself.